Solar and battery storage developers need alternative financing solutions for the land that hosts their projects, whether it's a loan against the lease value, whether it's buying an easement, or whether it's purchasing the fee simple. And that's what we're here to do.
All right, welcome back, Solar Warriors. I am so grateful that you are taking time out of your busy day. In fact, you are investing right now, not just in your development, but in our industry. You're giving us, in fact, the only non-renewable resource you possess. That is your time. I promise we're going to take good care of it. Here to help shepherd and steward that promise is my friend, Laura Pagliarulo. She is a entrepreneur for entrepreneurs, someone who has learned the trade, not just the tricks of the trade, of how the power markets work. She's a founding member of and CEO of SolaREIT. Prior to that, she was one of the key leadership team members at Clean Choice Energy. I'm sure many of you will recognize that name, where she built and grew their community solar business. And in fact, she led the community solar division for Sun Edison and did a ton of additional sort of industry and market firsts as far back as her time at Washington Gas and building energy efficiency businesses. Heck, she even launched the environmental club in her high school. Laura has a long history of protecting and coming up with products to enhance our environment. And if you like these kinds of conversations, well, you have landed in the right place, especially if this is your first time. We got more than 645 such conversations in our back catalog. Climate champions, solar warriors, just like Laura, who are on the front lines of our clean energy transition. So I hope that you will subscribe to the show so you won't miss out on a single opportunity to grow and learn along with us. But for now, I want you to tune up your skills with another powerful conversation here on Suncast. You know, if you are a longtime listener, I've said a few times that today's guest has taken a long time to get on the show. And that is why I know it's going to be valuable for you, because friends, when it is hard to get someone as a guest, it genuinely usually means that they are doing important things, and it just didn't work out for various reasons. But Laura and I finally made it happen. And before we get started, I do want to thank our friend, mutual industry veteran himself, Matt Hankey, who helped connect Laura and I way back on your birthday in 2021, when we did our first pre-interview. Laura, I'm stoked that we finally get the chance to dig in and do this interview. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Nico. I'm really happy to be here. And another shout out to Matt for connecting us.
Yeah, he's been good to the show, as have the IPS folks, Eric. And gosh, it's just fun to see how this industry grows, and the amoeba of how our industry is sort of coming together. And no surprise, as we dig into your backstory, that you have worked for notable companies like WGL and Sun Edison. So we'll dig into that. But before we jump deep into your whole backstory and everything that sort of brings us to why you are building the business that you're building, I often like to start with a quote. I'll read the one that I have picked out for today, and I'd love for you to contribute to one or comment on this one or both. And today's quote is, "The vision must be followed by the venture. It is not enough to stare up the steps. We must step up the stairs." Vince Havner brings that little drop of wisdom to us. And so many just stand there looking and thinking about how long and winding the staircase is. And I can promise you, my friends, after 8 years on this venture and 2.5 years on previous venture and 3 other on a previous, as a serial entrepreneur, like, you got to start walking up them stairs and figure out where the steps are broken, or where it was leading to the wrong doorway. Maybe it's Hogwarts style. Laura, does that resonate for you?
It does. I feel like my background is I've had a lot of entrepreneurial ventures within larger companies, but this is truly my first entrepreneurial venture where the opportunity was presented, and it was, plenty of risks, and we'll talk about that today. But so not just about like taking the risk and, sort of one step in front of the other and, starting to actualize your vision. But there's a Winston Churchill quote that was, "You're never going to reach your destination if you stop and throw stones at every dog that barks." Now listen, no, I love dogs and I don't advocate throwing stones at dogs, but I will say this. When you do decide to go and take that next step and sort of realize your vision, it's so important to not get distracted. And that was like one of the key lessons that we learned early on. So lots of opportunities to throw stones or even just, you know, focus on the next shiny thing, but critical to just focus on the one thing that matters. So
That's amazing. I love that. And I haven't heard that
mm.
of the many wonderful quotes of Winston Churchill. My favorite Churchill quote, and I think it is rightly attributed to him, is "I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time."
Yeah, that is true.
Oh, it's so true because I feel like sometimes that is what Suncast is.
Yeah,
Now,
you're right. Distilling it down to the most important
yeah,
message.
well, and
Yeah.
sometimes those most important messages are the 3 hour unpacking of someone's journey. Well, look at the outset here, I think that it's important to cover the macro, the problem. What is it that you would describe as the problem that was enunciated to you by Gautam, or that you and he had visualized or recognized in the outset that that you've created to solve?
When we launched SolaREIT, there was no one that could work with developers to solve their real estate
Mm-hmm.
problems. And what I mean by that is anytime we were developing a project and a landowner wanted something alternative to like the traditional lease, which comes with annuity payments over time, we as developers did not have a solution. Buying real estate is not ITC eligible. It's an entirely different, modeling exercise, different cost of capital. So when we were trying to get site control and someone requested something aside from that lease option, we would typically pass. So that's, fundamentally, there's a lot of products that financial products that have come from that, but that's really the problem we're solving. And in that work, we're adding value to developers. We're always accretive to a developer's project.
Well, you touched a little bit on it there in the problem statement, but I'd love to hear how is SolaREIT, the company that you all created, designed to purposely solve that problem for developers?
Yeah. So, you know, I think by way of background, when we originally launched, we thought we were going to have two channels, working with landowners directly and also working with solar developers. What we quickly learned was that, you know, we were far better suited just because we all come from the industry to work exclusively with
Ah,
developers.
yeah.
And when I say developers, solar and battery
Hmm.
storage developers. Everyone on the team, certainly everyone who has a senior function, has sometimes multiple decades of experience in the
Yeah.
industry. And what that means is we understand the problems developers are facing, which is critical. So, like for example, it's mid-October. I know all of my developer partners are rushing hard to bring projects to
Yeah.
NTP and to close on their MIPA agreements. So we basically designed our business so that it's has minimal friction, right? So developers can work with us, and it's not a doesn't require another resource. And essentially, what we do is we do three things. We either buy the land under solar projects that are in construction or operational, and battery storage projects as well. Product number two is we can buy the lease. And what effectively that means is the landowner retains ownership. We buy an easement over the project area for like a set duration of time, one lump sum payment. Landowner cashes out. And the third product that we offer is we can do like a solar land loan. It looks very similar to like a bank issued mortgage. Some key differences there, but effectively it allows the landowner to take a loan out of out of their lease, 100% loan to value. Some other differences there.
Got it. It's kind of like a HELOC on the payment stream.
It is. I mean, basically, it's the present value of future cash flows. We're pulling forward the value of the lease. We can model it all the way out to the extension periods.
What's an example of why a landowner would want or prefer that?
Yeah, I think it's so great to dive into case studies because this is really it's a financial product, and you know, until you can like get your head around practically how it works, it seems almost, I don't know, too abstract. So we work with, like a very simple example of how we work with developers would be, they have understood that getting purchase options is the best way for them to add value to their project. So when they're going out and getting site control, and I'll say this, a lot of DG developers that we work with, they only offer purchase
Yeah.
options. They don't even offer lease
Mhm.
options. The key there is you need to have a partner that's able to execute on those purchase options when notice to proceed actually occurs. So they amass these purchase options. We step in, we pay the landowner whatever agreed upon price, was set 2 or 3 years
Mhm.
ago. And then we typically can pay 30%, a little bit more for any purchase option. The developer collects that delta, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So that's one example. Another example would be a developer so that's the option example. Another example is, we work with a large developer in upstate New York, well, actually across all of New York, and they always own the land. And, they have lots of land positions with leases across the properties. They build the project, sell them to, another counterparty. Um, but they want capital. They want to free up capital. So we do loans against their leases, and they're effectively using those dollars as dev capital.
Right.
And our cost of capital is obviously a heck of a lot less than what you would get for a development capital loan. So
Got it. And then they are able, I assume that's got a balloon. We can get into the instrument later. I have a lot of
sure,
questions about just how the product works.
I'm sure.
You bring up terms, and I want to make sure we don't get too far down the rabbit hole, but too
Mm.
far also in the conversation before we explain terms that are used that might be confusing.
Mm.
Purchase option we'll get to, but MIPA, and so generally acronyms I try to disambiguate. Yeah, what is a MIPA?
Membership interest purchase
Mm-hmm.
agreement, essentially what developers use to sell the project at a certain point in
Okay.
time. So if you were a Massachusetts developer selling to a
Mm-hmm.
Nextera, you would use the instrument called a
Mm-hmm.
MIPA to sell the project.
Yeah. So you're buying, that is the instrument that allows you to transfer ownership of the membership interest in the LLC that owns the project.
Correct. You got it.
Before 2019, 20, 21, when you guys started really iterating on and creating this as a financial instrument, what solutions existed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Hannon Armstrong had a division that had been doing this for a long time. Um, and we had friends who were working over there. However, they were really targeting utility scale projects. Their approach was more reactive. So perhaps you'd get a portfolio that goes out to bid on and they would respond in an RFP process. Our approach is really different. So we're very proactive. We're a relationship based business. We're not necessarily, we don't necessarily focus on the transaction. Our goal is to really develop relationships with solar developers and battery storage developers, and solve their problems. So we actually don't respond to RFPs as a general rule.
That's good.
So
I made
yeah,
that I made that commitment the last time I was working for a construction company.
yeah,
I have shell shock still from responding
yeah.
to
I
RFPs.
mean, waste of time, race to the
Oh
bottom.
my
Yeah.
god, yeah. Plus, I'm at the time certainly was true. I was a perpetual procrastinator, so I was always the guy like who's racing into the office to deliver that hand must deliver by hand bid because I hadn't mailed it in time. Um, God, what do you feel? I think that timing is a key element to
Mm,
success in entrepreneurship. What do you
mm.
feel needed to be true for this to work? If you look back 5, 10, 15 years ago, why would this have failed?
I think one of the bigger changes that's happened right now is, the industry is booming. I mean, there's the amount of solar, and just to be clear, so we can offer these products on ground mount systems as well as landfills, rooftops, carports. So the amount of new solar and battery storage that is expected is just tremendous. Typically, you know, when the market continues to expand, there's much more of a demand for alternative financing options. And it's interesting because now we're in this high interest rate environment, and even more so now than ever. we are actually getting requests for what we do because capital is just more expensive everywhere, and our capital is just quite different than the typical sources developers would sort of leverage. If that makes sense.
Is there anything that has changed fundamentally about the market, about the sentiment of like with the number of developers? Like I'm going back to kind of, is there anything that changed specifically in the marketplace or needed to be true in order for this to succeed? Regulations.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the rules for, we are an actual real estate investment trust. That's, it's nothing's really changed from that perspective. I would say that, well, you know, what has changed, as I mentioned, is that the market continues to expand and you have more developers that haven't been around for a long time. And I think we're going to start to see this actually in the next 6 months as interest rates had been many of them had counted on interest rates falling, and in reality, they're not. So when people had thought they were going to sell their projects at a 7, they're actually not getting bids, less than a 9. And we're starting to receive a lot of phone calls from developers who are looking for, um, they're looking for ways to free up capital, right?
When you say a 7 versus a 9, can you unpack that?
Yeah, it's not really directly related to what we do
Mm-hmm.
here. I think the sort of the macro issue is developers had expected to sell their assets at a certain price, and that certain price had baked in a certain debt rate. But in reality, the interest rate slash debt rate has gone up, and what they expected to make, they're actually underwater.
Right. And I guess this is just in developer, like in modeling, what they were solving for as what they believed the investor's hurdle rate would be is now higher. 7% unlevered, or yeah, 7% unlevered versus 9% unlevered. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure I remember from my days developing, like nothing's changed because that's been like 2014, 15.
I was going to say the best thing about this, Nico, is that you were at RE plus. This is not a zero sum game. As the market continues to expand, everybody's winning. So unlike other industries like pharmaceuticals, where I win if you lose, there's plenty of market to go around. So
Okay, I feel like you've enunciated pretty well who you sell to. Is there a category of developer that is better suited to these kinds of instruments? You mentioned in the previous answer the notion of a more immature developer in terms of their seasoned understanding of buyer expectations. Could you unpack? And then I don't need a long answer, but I'm just curious if there's like a ideal client profile.
we actually don't like to work with unseasoned
Okay,
developers, just to be
yeah,
clear. Yeah. So the types of developers that we work with are those who have experience. The industry is small. We tend to know a lot of the developers in the space. Either those who need capital for real estate. So, and this is the case unless you are a very well-funded, IPP. The capital that's used for real estate is very different than the capital that's used to develop projects. So as I mentioned, it's not ITC eligible. So you're capital constrained, maybe small to medium size, but you know what you're doing, right? You understand how solar works and battery storage. And the second class of developers that we target are really those that actually can develop utility scale projects, not just DG developers, but who have recognized early on that their capital is much better suited to not buy millions of dollars in real estate. So unless you really have a separate land co strategy in place already, it's very hard to set up, first of all. But unless you have that in place, you really are going to work with either a Hannon or a SolaREIT or someone like that.
I'd love to hear some success points. You kind of blew my mind with how you started the business. And I don't want to go into the founding moment yet, but um, shortly after you were brought on, or around the time you were brought on, part of what you had to do was raise essentially a first fund so you could go out and offer this sort of financing instrument. How much did you raise in your first round?
Yeah, it was kind of blew my mind too to have that discussion with you a couple of days ago. So when we got together, so it was really Gotham and I in the beginning, and two other founders, Matt being one of them, actually. But really, when Gotham and I were speaking, we had this idea on a piece of paper, and we had to start raising equity. So we raised $50 million in equity, primarily from ultra high net worth individuals, a couple institutional investors, and that was done all during the pandemic. So we launched SolaREIT a little over 3 years ago. So really in June or July in 2020. It's interesting to think about, pandemics don't announce themselves. It's interesting because when you're in it, you hear about a pandemic, but they don't announce themselves, and there's really not like an intermediate step. So it's only in hindsight we look back and we think, wow, we raised all that equity without having one in-person
Yeah.
meeting, all by Zoom. All of our investors took a huge leap of faith in terms of what we were doing. I mean, it makes sense. And then that was really, we proved out the concept. We filled that first fund. So 50 million in equity, and then we closed on $100 million in debt from TIA Kraft Naveen via securitization. So
Yeah. So
um,
it was 100 million in debt, 50 million in equity, 150 million fund for the first round, all
correct.
virtual. And in what span of time?
We closed on our securitization in December of 2020, end of December in
So
2020.
roughly 6 months.
Yep. And we had very few deals under our belt at that
Mhm.
point in time.
Did you have to take that out to Wall
Um,
Street? Because as a REIT, I presume you did.
we did not. We're not a public REIT,
Okay.
so we are a
All
private
right.
REIT. So all this is done privately, private securitization, private
Mm-hmm.
rating. We had to use one of the top four on Wall Street,
Okay.
which was
And you
pretty
got an
awesome.
A
So
rating.
we got an A rating. It was
Congratulations.
pretty
Amazing.
cool. Yeah. Tons of work. Again,
What do you
I think
attribute
one of
that
the
to? Why the A rating for a brand new startup with,
yeah, it's interesting. I think that so what we're, you know, if you think about what we're doing, paying the leases is the top of the waterfall only behind taxes. So this would probably be appealing to like project finance people. So essentially, even when PG&E and SunEdison went bankrupt, they always made their lease payments because if you don't pay your landowners for the leases, you lose rights to the asset. Um, and so I don't want to say bulletproof business model, but pretty solid. And it's also fascinating to think back at that time 3 years ago when we were very much a startup. And now we have, this fantastic partner with Carval, AB Carval, who's made a large equity investment in us. So we're no longer in startup mode. Um, we're transitioning pretty quickly here and poised for scale. And one other thing that I think about, Nico, is when you're an asset owner and you have hundreds of landowners that you have to interact with, because you even aside from just getting the project built, you're always going to have an ongoing request for easements or estoppels, SNDAs. They like working with us far better than tracking down all of these individual landowners, because really you're reaching out to myself or to Laura Klein for those requests. So
you mentioned casually AV Carval. In August, you closed in 250 million facility. What this I presume represents Fund Two.
yeah, the new asset co. Mhm.
I mean, it's a big jump. 150 is a great start. 250 suggests that you're doing something right. What do you think the AB Carval team sees in SolaREIT that convinced them this is the right vehicle to invest in?
Well, I can't speak to sort of their motivations. I can speak to my impression of the
Mhm.
team, which has been fantastic. So they clearly have a demonstrated desire to invest
Yeah.
in renewable energy companies. So whether it's battery storage or solar developers. And my sense is, I don't believe they've made an investment, and I could be totally wrong, in a similar company that does the real estate component of this. But I would imagine, just like so many in this market, as you're starting to speak to more players in the market, you're starting to hear the expression of a need for some sort of financing under the land under the project. So that's my sense. I also totally give credit to the
Mm.
team, my team, who has done so much in such a short period of time. I mean, it's really that's the most humbling piece for me, is to look around and see everyone who's around me and what they've
Yeah.
accomplished, which has really been significant. So we've got great
Yeah.
people.
I missed it. Was the 250 an equity or debt or both?
Yeah. So the way that it works is it's $100 million originally, up to $250 million. And we are, of course, are going to lever that with
Mhm.
debt. So that's the next phase here.
That's amazing. So that's an equity commitment. That's a tremendous stamp of approval. I
Yeah, it is. It's tremendous
Yeah, it
validation. It
is.
really
It is.
is.
That's a
Yeah.
5x increase in just the belief in the company and your capacity. I would assume it comes with probably a 10x growth in pipeline.
We have a lot of work to do, Nico.
Well, you're no stranger to hard work. Let's talk
Yeah.
a bit about how that might have come about. Where did you grow up? Where were you raised?
I grew up in the Berkshires, Western Massachusetts, so which is a pretty beautiful part of the state, I will say. I don't know if have you ever been
I
there?
have. I have.
Yeah.
You know what I loved about the answer? You could see it in my eyes when you first said you grew up in the Berkshires in our one of our previous conversations. You go, Nico, I grew up in a rural part of the country, not in a fancy way.
Yeah.
So for those,
Everyone hears the Berkshires and they think,
Mhm.
oh, she was this entitled. But no, we had a great childhood, but it was, you know, a, it wasn't the second home in the Berkshires. So
Yeah, in
yeah.
fact, it was a family home, a generationally family home. Your mom is descended from a Berkshire farming family. Can you talk about the that cultural history and that heritage for your family?
Yeah, so my mother's family had been in that area for generations. Her maiden name was Adams, just to give you a sense. Adams from
Yeah, of
Massachusetts.
course.
It's a name that you probably heard
Yeah.
of. And so a lot of just a long farming family
Mhm.
in that part of the country. My father, his family's from Italy, so he's first generation. So on both sides, it was a really strong work ethic modeled to me from both of my
Mhm.
parents.
Did your father still
So
have an accent because because his family was immigrant? No.
no, my grandparents, my grandfather didn't speak English very well. My nona learned English better,
Mm,
very thick accent, and I spent a tremendous amount of time with them growing up. So
yeah. Tell
yeah.
me about that time with your grandparents and your family. What was the conversation like around the dinner table?
Um, with my
Well,
grandparents, yeah. I mean, we taught we a lot of our life was centered around food, Nico.
of
So
course.
it was around family and food. I mean, that was the primary focus when we were kids. But I mean, my grandmother, I call her my nona. She was. I remember in fifth grade, we had to pick a person in history that we admired and write about them, and I picked her because just her story coming over here when she was 16, right after World War II, and having lost so much in the war, and just starting new is, I mean, it's the immigrant story, but when it's closer to home, you feel it more. So
There's a lot of genetic and muscle memory embodied in immigrant families that is both sort of work ethic, hardworking, humble. Um, a lot of that also is land of opportunity, and folks come to America and become entrepreneurs. Was that, as a farm family, that is implicitly, for the most part, entrepreneurship. Do you feel like you recognized early in life a sense of independence and entrepreneurship?
yeah, definitely. So my dad's parents, my grandfather was a stonemason,
Mm,
so that's all
yeah.
all self started. And then growing up, my father was a teacher, a special ed teacher, but we always had real estate, meaning like he'd buy these dumpy houses in the Berkshires when they still existed, and and renovate them
Mm.
and then rent them out. So there was always a sense of entrepreneurship and like little businesses I'd have as a kid. I started my own little newspaper, a dog walking business, a cat. It's like all the things that I assume so many kids do, but that was my
Do you know
jam.
what's funny? I
So
mean, I've got 3 kids. None of them have started a business yet, which still surprises me.
yeah, me too.
I
What is
know,
up with that?
but I think that we just assume that this is a good thing kids do.
Yeah.
I look back scornfully on my like 9-year-old self. Like I have very judgmental conversations in my head of like that lazy kid that never started any kind of business, and like how I regret that he didn't because I started so late. Like I was 26 when I started my first business, um, which is hilarious.
That's not very late. I mean, I didn't start my own real business until recently. I mean,
Yeah,
you know, my dog walking business, really didn't work out,
I've given
Nico.
my kids so many ideas. Like it's only in hindsight as an adult that you can be like, God, adults are so willing to just give kids money, right? I
Totally.
have a
Totally.
I have a cousin whose son, they were glass blowers, and they would go around to all these fairs, like trade fairs,
Mm,
and mostly like Renaissance fairs and stuff,
mm.
craft fairs, such. And at 5 years old, he went down to the river, picked up river rocks, and he walked back around to all the vendors, and he said, "Would you like to buy this river rock? It's $1." And he made $25, and because he
Yeah, because he's really
that's
cute
right.
and he's 5 and
And
yeah,
then and
yeah.
then he goes to his dad and he's like, "Where'd you get that money?" He's like, "Oh, I just sold 25 rocks." He's like, "No way." Well, don't you have some friends? And my cousin's now got
Oh,
many successful businesses, but this kid goes around to the next fair and he recruits all the
oh,
vendors' kids, and they all go get
no
rocks
kidding.
for him.
Oh yeah. How long ago was
This
this?
is
I mean,
like maybe
this kid's going
this is like
places.
maybe 15 years ago. He now runs his own business. Yeah, he makes his own.
Of
Yeah,
course. Yeah.
he makes
Yeah.
these ridiculously
Hmm.
impressive LED lights. Um,
Hmm. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, you growing up in the Berkshires were exposed both to culture as well as hard work. Did you have a sense early in life of what you thought you might become? Like, what did that aspirational 12-year-old Laura look for?
Yeah. I would say that from the entire reason why, and listen, it wasn't well thought out at all. So I think this is really important. Certainly when I'm talking to my kids, it's like I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I definitely knew. Most of my time growing up was spent in the woods, all, hiking, camping. We all were just outside all the time because truly there's nothing else to do in the Berkshires during much of the year except for that. Um, so I just wanted to get involved in the environmental space. And then it was only, in college where I really started to learn more about the issues with climate. I mean, really, that's really what it boiled down to.
And of course, you
So
went to Vermont, where
yeah,
always on the
yeah, exactly.
vanguard
Totally.
with regards to
Absolutely. And
climate.
which is crazy to me because I never, you knew they were forward thinking and the professors were outstanding.
Yeah.
But it's still surprising to me that the language
Hmm.
and what the dialogue was back in 1998 is like now coming to surface in mainstream America, like right now.
Yeah.
And it's been a couple years since I've been an undergrad, Nico. So
You and me both.
yeah, exactly. So that really, that's really where my interest and energy in the environment peaked. So I started, you know, my thesis work as an undergrad was on biomass. There's a big biomass plant in Burlington. So, anyways, it was cool.
From undergrad, how did you find your way into energy? Was it something that you just always knew you would do?
Yeah, it was actually a choice because when I was an undergrad, and this is still factually correct, that emissions are either coming from, electricity, how we heat buildings, residential homes, or transportation. I kind of, like so much in life, you kind of just have to go with doors as they open. So first got involved in energy efficiency stuff, then wind power, and then solar.
What was the energy efficiency stuff? Because I remember you sold. I still don't understand what it was. You said it was the first of, and
Yeah,
seemed like it was a big deal.
yeah, yeah. No, it still is. I mean, they're an amazing group of people. In Burlington at the time, there was a group, a nonprofit called Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. And this is when I was like a baby. I mean, I look back at myself then, it was, 22-year-old Laura, or 23-year-old. But they won the contracts, but in Vermont at the time, in order to meet the demand of the growing load, there was proposals to build massive transmission lines. Velco at the time had proposed to build massive transmission lines. So Vermont had the foresight, being Vermont, to invest in an energy efficiency utility. So essentially, the goal of this utility was not to sell power, it was to reduce the overall electricity needs of the state, which they successfully did. So VEIC won a contract for this entity called Efficiency Vermont. And that model, I believe, it was replicated in Washington, D.C. with the DC SEU. I think it was replicated in Ohio, maybe. I don't know. I haven't been in that space in a while, but it was certainly exposure to a group of really smart people who were doing really forward-thinking things. So.
What did you learn there that you would say is the like a cornerstone learning in your career? Something that still serves you today as a CEO?
I remember going to it was actually my boss's boss at the time, and feeling frustrated because I had so much energy to give, and I wasn't as pleased with the process of advancement. And he looked at me and basically said, Laura, when you're not as busy with your work or fulfilled with your work, you're going to develop other hobbies and things in life to fulfill you. And man, that's right. I did so many other things besides work, which seems to be like the predominant, sun and moon in my life these days. But it was good wisdom at the time, and he was right. So
you were there for less than a couple of years before going over to Washington Gas. What was it that you saw in the opportunity of Washington Gas? Were you recruited there? And talk about that transition.
Yeah, I just come out of grad school at that time, so I went to grad school in Virginia and liked the position. Originally was to be involved in their voluntary renewable power sales. So I had no idea what a deregulated supplier was. But I will say that I spent a long time at it was so Washington Gas is the parent, the utility, the deregulated division is the entity that I worked for. I had the opportunity to work with really fantastic people, really smart people in the industry. And that's really where I spent 7 years there in total, really learned the power business, really learned power markets, transmission capacity, ancillary services, hedging, risk. It was, everything from like what a rec is and, compliance versus voluntary markets. And it was really helpful as far as like my career goes and where I am now. So,
Yeah, we talked about this, but the advice that I've given folks most often, I unwittingly created a career podcast. I didn't intend to do that, but it turns out a lot of folks listen to the show because they feel like whether they've got a solid job or not, they need career advice. And so
mm-hmm.
we have these parts of ourselves. You know who you are, and like this is so a lot of folks are listening because they live vicariously through others, and it gives them inspiration and hope. It also helps them course correct. I had Andy Tang on, and he talked about deciding that he wanted to go do a 4-year sort of tour of duty at PG&E, right? Because he knew that was going to give him the information required to really operate at a high level, at an executive level in the energy sector. So I've given that advice based on that interview, and based on also an interview I did with Emily Wangerman at Lightsource BP, who did the same. Or rather, that was her story. She didn't intentionally go to PG&E for that, I don't think, but she was there for, 7 or 8 years. Andy, for you, for like almost 7 years. I am certain that you would also similarly advise folks who are young and want to understand the power markets and want to, like, I see people all the time, they're like, I'm going to go join this startup developer. I'm like, you have no idea the game they're playing. Go learn the game and you'll be 3 times more valuable when you come back to work for them. So the question I have is not, is that relevant and right? Because I know through talking to you that it is, but how long do you think it takes? There's like a minimum viable institutionalized time. What do you think that is?
I mean, I don't think you really start learning a business at all until being there for 2 years. I mean, I think you have to at least put in 2 years, and then you can, you go deep. I think I needed all 7 of those years because it's not, I mean, at the same time, I was learning about natural gas markets and how the utility functioned, and, the learning went deep. But I think a minimum is 2 years, to sort of, it's like table stakes. Anything above that is where you start to, really dig in. But it's, to your point, it's incredibly helpful. I didn't seek out to do it, but it's foundational, I think, to where I am now.
So I know a lot of folks are going to want to know more about SolaREIT and your time at SunEdison, but I think that, as I just enunciated, the time at 7 years was really formative at Washington Gas and Electric. When you reflect back on the work that you're doing now, what were some of the key initiatives you were a part of at Washington Gas and Electric that helped you really know your stuff when you moved? SunEdison recruited you specifically for community solar. Like, I know that you were involved in growing growing the energy sales. You were involved in a lot of renewable energy stuff. You had just gotten your, I think, master's in renewable energy at James Madison. So unpack that a little bit for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never actually really thought about this, but I
I invite you now.
no, it's actually
with
it's
us.
like it's interesting to pause and look back at your own history. But you mentioned earlier the wind projects, the early wind projects in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. This is before, you were seeing solar everywhere. This is really back in time. Translating the installation of a wind farm to then the voluntary market. Obviously, you have compliance requirements for any electricity supplier to meet RPS
Right.
requirements.
Renewable
But
portfolio
then,
standards.
exactly, sorry, our
That's okay.
renewable portfolio standards. But also bringing that to the voluntary markets, people who would opt to pay more for 100% green electricity, particularly from a specific farm in West Virginia. Obviously, you're not getting electrons from that specific farm. But where that brought me was that I remember this so specifically. Community solar didn't even really exist at the time. And I remember, I probably can find this document, a proposal for Washington Gas to take some of their existing solar farms and turn it into a subscription-based model, similar to the wind farms we did. And I remember, just thinking through all of this and mapping it out, and then watching as some of the early policy evolved, because we didn't have projects in Massachusetts.
Were you involved in like the early projects that Kevin Schulte was working on, like doing community solar for wind?
Kevin Schulte, but it was more like the wind projects were community energy
Yeah.
primarily. Jay Carless, Harry Warren was the president of Washington Gas at the time. He's a great guy. But yeah, anyways, it was the translation of renewable energy, not only to the compliance markets for renewable portfolio standards, but also to the voluntary market, because it was meeting people's needs and wants was really interesting.
Yeah.
So, and how you message that. I mean, you're taking a complex market function, that involves physics and distilling it into something that's very simple for people to understand.
Yeah. I think, it's really, I mean, that's still something that is a challenge for, the Arcadias and Perches and Pivots of the world. How do you message it? And that's their job, is to, I think the thing that you unlocked for a lot of folks just now that I don't think I've heard anybody else in any interview that we've done really enunciate, perhaps Nathan Giovanelli, because he was at IGS and he talks a lot about it. But that's voluntary markets. People don't understand how these markets are structured. So voluntary market, what I heard you say is people who would opt to pay more for green electricity. Like, that is, in a nutshell, a voluntary market. It is folks that are saying, I will pay for a different kind of electron.
And now how we've evolved to say, in fact, solar is now so cost competitive that with community solar, you can actually save with a green electron. I mean, like, my mind was like blown when this product started to evolve. So we've come a long way.
So you were involved in some of the early carbon offset projects. What do you think about the likelihood of carbon markets in the United States as it stands right now?
Honestly, Nico, I have not been following those markets. We had a great experience at Washington Gas because we started a carbon offset program, but it was a true carbon offset program and we were generating offsets with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. All of our offsets were certified. That was another example of the free markets essentially saying they're going to vote with their dollars to offset the impact of natural gas. I have not been tracking carbon markets. I will say this: it's been I'm very much involved in the renewable markets because I know that it works and I know that it's cost competitive. And it's been a real pleasure to watch, for example, the state of Georgia advocating for more solar power,
Yeah.
even though it was traditionally, it was traditionally associated with a Democratic base,
Hmm.
but now it just makes financial
Right.
sense. So I know people have been talking about carbon markets for a long time, but
So you left WGL to go to a company that at the time was the mothership, right? Sun Edison. What was the state of their community solar initiative at the time that you joined, and how did that? What were you brought in to do?
yeah, so community solar that involved any sort of residential component at Sun Edison at the time was non-existent.
Hmm.
So there was community solar from the sense of like a Minnesota project with a number of commercial off takers, maybe 5 per project or something.
Yeah,
But
just virtual net
community
metering.
solar,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But they were calling it community solar. So I will say that when I joined SunEd, it was quite an uphill battle. Not in my team. I was brought on for this purpose
Mm,
was to bring more megawatts on the board
right.
and to work with the residential team in California at SunEd. And these two teams never really spoke. I remember talking to our friends at Terraform about
Hmm.
the fact that you would have residential subscribers that are effectively fungible. Um, and I remember them telling me there's no way we could do this.
That's awesome.
uh, we got it done, but yeah.
And then, of course, Sun has imploded, and you, like so many of the diaspora, were inundated with job opportunities because it was, in fact, the Harlem Globetrotters of the industry, meaning like everybody could play every position. The Sun Edison team was phenomenal and with good reason. And you chose to go over to Tom Matzey's Clean Choice. Why?
I like Tom. I had a lot of respect for him in the industry. I think that's the first piece.
Hmm.
So I liked what he had accomplished, and I liked his vision for building out a solar team. Even at Clean Choice, there were great players, both some of them who had actually come from SunEd as well.
And they didn't have solar
But
at the time. They were just a voluntary.
yeah, they had received a grant at the time from the Department of Energy to build out. Oh gosh, this is going back in time to to build out a platform, I believe, for customer aggregation for
Oh,
solar. Um, but no, there was no. I mean, there was community solar as an industry was still fairly nascent,
yeah.
um, and a lot of the team came on board. It was Peter Coleman was there at the time, and he was at Terraform.
Hmm.
But really, it was Tom who got me on board at Clean Choice.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of folks in the solar industry look at Clean Choice through a different lens as I did than the way the power industry looks at Clean Choice, right? It was one of the original competitive electric supply companies in the US and the Northeast, certainly in deregulated markets. Um, you and I chatted about this briefly, but for folks who are unfamiliar, kind of peers in the industry for Clean Choice on that side of the business is IGS, which we've talked about with Nate Giovanelli, Constellation, WGL, where you used to work, Direct Energy, even Dominion. I would imagine that yet again, not the Sun Edison experience is wholly different, but as a follow up to WGL, there were some core, like core memories that serve for you now in leadership. Is there anything that you feel you bolted onto your toolkit from Clean Choice that's worth noting?
So when I was at Sun Edison, part of my role was sort of bridging the divide between the distributed generation team and the residential team, who
Mm,
historically never spoke to each other.
wow.
And that was, going out to California and understanding how residential could help the DG team with actually subscribing customers for community solar. That was pretty satisfying, actually. We did some really interesting things in that relationship. But then at Clean Choice, something similar because the DNA of Clean Choice was renewable electricity supply. And really good people, really good shop. But solar, as you know, especially when you're doing community solar subscriptions and development and so forth, is very, very different. So there was a lot of time spent, from everything in educating the technology team on the tools we will need to sell subscriptions to consumers, to making sure we have the right regulatory support so that every subscription agreement meets certain requirements. Just a lot of educating the existing team on how solar is different.
Put me in the place and time where you first got that call from Gotham, and he said, "Hey, I know you're having fun over at Clean Choice, but
Yeah, I actually ran into him at RE Plus. Remember the one in Salt Lake City
yeah,
at the
2019,
museum?
yeah,
The
oh,
event at
that
the
was so
museum?
good. That was
Yeah, it was so good.
what was that law firm? It was so good. Did the
Yeah,
whiskey tasting? It was
it
amazing.
was. But listen, just the fact you could like also walk around the
The
museum,
museum
have
is
it all to
stunning.
yourself. So I literally ran into Gotham at that event. I like actually literally
Bumped
stumbled on
into him.
him,
Yeah.
and I hadn't seen him in years. And he didn't have he was about to announce a big business venture at the time, um, and we didn't talk about this explicitly, but it did open the door to connect later on, and we started having lunch and just chatting about different ideas, and this was one of them.
So as you began down this path, and we talked about the process in the pandemic of you and Gotham raising your first 150 million fund, you have that rubber meets the road moment. You mentioned a moment ago that you you generally need a couple of years in a business to truly understand it, and I've found that that's true for entrepreneurial ventures as well. What assumptions did you have to challenge in the marketplace or in the business plan in that first year or two of starting the company?
Well, our background collectively had been in solar, not necessarily in real estate, and this is very much a real estate play within the solar industry. So I think a few things we did absolutely right would be we knew we were going to make mistakes, and as a result, we wanted to make mistakes on a small level. So we were very intentional about the first few deals we made being small. $300,000 for a piece of land, $400,000. And that was because we knew there would be errors. And there were, but they were not meaningful because they were on a much smaller size. Just learning common assumptions that you start to see different scenarios in the market as things go on. So for example, we are all committed to helping finance leases on landfills. Um, but and brownfields, things like that. But you know, that's every brownfield is not created the same, and there's a different set of requirements when we do those types of transactions.
So it
Um,
became hard to templatize that deal.
it didn't become hard. It was like we had to go through it. Then we're like, okay, what did we learn? And what would we do differently? What would we do the same? And then here's our established set of rules. And we did that. Now we have the playbook, but in the beginning, we didn't have a playbook as to what worked. So, the other thing that we learned, and I think I touched upon this briefly, is when we launched, we had also thought, oh my gosh, there's so many landowners that have operational projects on their land. We got to go after these guys,
Yeah, they're
and
gonna want
and we,
money. Yeah, they.
yeah, I mean, we did a direct mail
Mm,
campaigns, call campaigns, and we did get a lot of those deals in the door, but the return on energy and investment
mm.
just was not there because unless a landowner comes to us with a very specific financial need, it is not, my job to convince them to do anything. And that's, true for many things. So,
Can you contextualize? Some folks listening might consider a big deal to be $80,000 or $100,000. Can you contextualize the average deal size of a ticket for you of 300K is
yeah.
small?
Yeah. So it's not so much, I think that's a great point. We're not buying leases or loans or land based on the appraised value. We're buying it based on a lease rate. So a deal of that size would be, for example, a project in rural South Carolina at $300 an acre, or a very small project in New York. So we still do deals at that size, Nico, but now we also do deals that are $12 million, $15 million,
Right. Yeah.
Um,
So for
yeah.
context, and maybe this is a little bit of inside baseball for folks who don't understand this at all, how does the payment stream look for a farmer that's getting in South Carolina a $300 an acre payment or lease? Like, what is that? What does that payment strip look like? And what does, and I want to come back to something else that we talked at the very beginning that I said I wanted to return to. What does the availability of or importance of a purchase option do for that product?
Leases are structured either, you're going to make monthly payments, quarterly payments, biannual or annual payments. We're totally agnostic as to, so when we step into any transaction, we don't touch the existing paperwork. We don't impact tax equity, debt. We don't touch the lease. We take everything that's already been baked and we just focus on the underlying real estate. The only thing that we do is we run title on every transaction we're going to be doing, obviously, to make sure title's clean. But we are valuing, so for that landowner, that case you articulated in South Carolina, we're going to be looking at the entire revenue flow for the base term of the lease, plus the extension terms, because in our mind, if you have a project with an interconnection, we do not see the feasibility of someone saying, no, we're just going to
Right.
decommission it and not extract more.
Yeah. Typical lease tenure is 20 years.
Yeah, I'd say that that's 20 to 25. And then you can, we model out to, 35, 40 years, something like that.
And why not 50? I mean, like a traditional coal plant is 50.
I would say that the market in general right now is assuming 35 years for most equity and debt providers. I think there's a case, of course, for longer, but but I would also say that that's not really where things are. Once you start getting out into, those tail years, there's not a
There's
lot
not
of
the value,
value in
right?
terms
Mm-hmm.
of me, increasing the purchase price. So
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And also, I presume it would be the developer asking for a longer, an extension of that model rather than you. Like you're going to want, if you could do it, the way to optimize for your shareholders would be a 20-year assumption, right?
yeah, there are plenty of scenarios where um, a developer might own land and they say, you know what, I need cash. I want to monetize my real estate, but I really want control in year 17. I don't want to sell my land and I want control in year 17. So we basically price it out as an easement for 17 years, give them upfront, capital. Our easement is around that project area for 17 years. And then once that time period's up, it's right back in their control. And, they're the fee simple owner.
It's a vehicle for accredited investors to invest in real estate without actually having to own it as a unitary, like a singular owner, right? It's the same. It's the same as like what is it that was used? Like Terraform did this, right? Like there are different ways to own power plants, and the oil
Mm-hmm.
companies do this all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's similar. I would say that it's some of when we were raising money through those original investors, some of them had expressed a desire for us to be structured as a real estate investment trust. Even though that requirement is not necessarily one we have to adhere to right now with this new asset co, we will be doing that. And some of the things, like I'll give you an example of how it can be restrictive sometimes. So if we encounter a lease that has, the escalator is based on CPI or, and then with some kind of floor, a REIT would not necessarily allow you to um, take a risk on CPI. Or for example, what would not be a REITable asset is collecting lease revenue that's a form of production value from the plant. So let's say your lease is equivalent to 1% of production. So that's the kind of stuff we'll do as part of this asset co. But these are the scenarios that we had no idea we would be encountered with in the very beginning of our work. We have solutions for all of them now, but originally it was, how do we solve for this? How do we solve for this? And you know, that's what we do. We solve problems. So
I feel like there are a lot of folks who are listening and still not really clear on exactly sort of how and when in the development cycle you enter into the process. One of the things you said at the very beginning was that you can pay 40% more of the purchase option. Developer collects the difference. Can you talk a bit about your ability to add premium value to developers, as well as when in the development cycle you can add that value, and ultimately why?
Yeah, that's great. So we add value to developers' work in two ways. We either can pay more for a purchase option that they have in place, or we could take the purchase option price and solve for the lowest lease rate that we possibly could achieve. And as a result, they get a higher development fee when they're selling the asset. We don't come into a deal. Typically, we're brought in sometimes 8 months, a year before a transaction would actually close. We can close on the land component, either buying the land itself, doing a land loan, or buying the easement when the project is at financial NTP. So essentially, I want to confirm that interconnection is in place, discretionary permits are in hand. There's a plan for offtake if it's in a community solar market. If there is a PPA in markets like California or Arizona, I do want to know, that there's revenue, contracted revenue. But that's really when we step into a deal.
Right. Basically, when you know there's contract revenue, and it's at the point where funds can start flowing for the project.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's not actually no, because the project oftentimes, I mean, construction doesn't necessarily have to begin for another year. I mean, we have projects where we close at notice to proceed, but they're not actually going to start building the project for a number of years to come, not years to come, excuse me, months to come. But the interconnection and the discretionary permit piece is what those are two essential things that we kind of can't waive.
Yeah. Well, what I meant was when funds start to flow, it's financial NTP. The banks sign off. Everybody is in agreement on the structure of the deal. You guys are involved in the deal, which is why you have to come in before it gets to financial NTP, right?
We come in when the project's in construction, or obviously if it's operational as well.
Why can you pay more for a purchase option? I don't understand that. I'm trying to understand the unit economics of the business.
Yeah. So if you were, go back to the days where you were developing projects, if you're getting site control for a piece of land, and you're going to get site control based on the appraised value, you're going to tell a landowner that I'm going to pay you some option, some kind of option price every year until the project reaches this point. But when the project is at notice to proceed, I'm going to pay you this much money. And that price is maybe slightly higher, but close to the appraised value of the underlying land.
Of the land, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, because there's nothing there. It really is,
and that's
just
the purchase option. Yeah, the purchase option.
Exactly.
It's basically forward pricing the value of what you will give them over time to pay for the land. So
the reason why I can pay more is because I'm buying it based on the lease revenue.
Yeah, right.
Not on the appraised value at all. We don't even look at the appraised value of land when we're purchasing it.
Right, and typically a developer will bake in the delta between the cost of the land and the value of the asset that they build on the land as a part of their upside.
Yep. And some developers actually say, you know what, we don't want to keep that delta. We don't need the cash. We want you, SolaREIT, we had assumed $2,000 an acre for a lease rate. Can you beat that? And we come in and we say, we can offer $1,700 an acre. Therefore, when they're selling the project to the long-term asset owner, they're going to get a higher debt fee. We have a great business we work with as well. 80 Makepeace. They're in Eastern Mass. They're the largest private landowner in Eastern Massachusetts, and they basically grow all the cranberries for ocean spray.
What's it called?
It's called AD Makepeace.
And AD Makepeace Company.
Yeah, their projects were developed by Borrego, and they were some of the early adopters of solar in Massachusetts. I mean, they have Smart One projects.
Oh, wow.
So we're going back in time. And they have realized that, so we've done, I don't know, this would be the fourth portfolio we're working on with them, where they're basically freeing up the capital in the lease. They're never selling their land. So in that instance, we're buying easements over the project area. And they're using that capital to fund their business, to do new infrastructure projects. So things like that.
That is it's just using the solar asset like a HELOC on a home. I love it. I love it. So I had a boss back when I was developing projects. He said, "I love solar. Solar is real estate without the occupancy risk."
It's true. It is
But there
true.
wasn't there weren't products, at that time.
Hmm.
Hannon Armstrong was really early in creating these kinds of
Yeah.
products. It was 2013, 2014.
Yeah.
There certainly wasn't a SolaREIT. And then, so if I'm an investor in SolaREIT, how do I make money?
Well, you'd have to have been an investor in the first fund. So the second asset co is all, Carval is the primary equity investor. But when we came out, when all of those original investors took a bet on us, because that's really what it was, they invested money and we had no proof of concept. Uh, you're going to be getting a dividend over time. So, and then obviously, if there's ever an exit event, they will also be a part of that.
I
But so
love That's
far,
what I
we've
love about REITs. It's like
yeah,
Masterworks. Masterworks is like,
exactly.
oh, it's
And it's interesting because here we sit 3 years after we launched the business,
yeah.
and we have achieved what we set out to achieve for Fund One,
I need
which
to,
is
yeah, keep going. Which was,
no, I'm going to say full deployment of capital.
yeah,
So we've deployed,
amazing.
we've done what we said we would do with the hurdles we had established. So it's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
I love that. I'm gonna have to introduce you to Mike over at Energy. I think that, I mean, there's so many businesses that would benefit from what you guys are
Totally.
offering.
The cool thing is, before when I used to work for different shops, obviously, um, you know, what you're doing is kind of competitive in nature.
Mhm.
What we do right now is applicable to everyone
Mm.
in the space,
Mhm. Yeah,
and
and not just
that's
solar.
yeah, it's the joy of my job. I get to talk to everyone again,
Mhm.
you know.
But well,
And
except for Hannon Armstrong.
no, I talk to those guys too. I mean, listen, I one thing that kind of I always chuckle because I do know people at some competitive shops, but I never, like I said, it's not a zero sum game. Plenty of business to go around. There's no need to get strange
Yeah,
in front of competitors. So
that's true.
yeah,
I have to remind myself of that a lot. Even in
yeah,
even in the marketing side of the industry, which is ironically kind of where I find myself now. Like, I spent years. I built a residential solar installation company. I spent years selling solar panels and developing megawatts of hundreds of megawatts of solar projects. And now I spend all day, every day helping people like SolaREIT tell their story better, right? And
yeah, yeah.
helping folks, like you said, one of the key problems we have in the industry right now is we don't know how to tell the homeowner, the consumer, the value of what we do. And
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Residential is tough. I mean, you really have to listen. There were people at Clean Choice. Our chief marketing officer at the time had been the CMO for Verizon. He was so good, Nico. I mean, and this is what I keep trying to tell everyone who works for me, is that consumers, it's two options, two very simple options. Provide anyone with more than two options, you lose them.
yeah,
And especially when you're talking about like rooftop loans and it's yeah, it's challenging.
I love you did that just now, because the very next segment, as we sort of round third base to home, is what have you learned from the folks that you've worked alongside that
Yeah.
have both, like, you've been able to distill into these kind of
Mhm.
truisms, and that you pass along to others in your team. Distill it down to two options. Anything else that resonates or stands out for you?
I mean, there's so much. It's for me, it's always about connecting with people as individuals. So when I go out into the market, if I'm at a conference or I'm meeting a new potential partner, I always want to listen. I want to hear what interests them. I want to hear what their problems are. And then, equally important is if I don't think I can solve a problem that they have, I'm just going to say that. And just being transparent, very transparent about what we can and can't do from the beginning. I think when I first started doing origination work all those years ago, I never felt comfortable doing that. But I think it's just very important to be that transparent in the beginning.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've changed your mind on about the way that the business works, or the way that you sort of once viewed it, or anything where you had to make? Yeah. So I'll wait for that.
Yeah, there's been a lot of hard choices.
Mhm.
I think that, you know, it takes just as much time for us to close on a deal that's $300,000 as a deal
Mhm.
that's $3 million. And I think that collectively, the heart of myself and a couple people on the team is to continue to do a lot of the smaller deals.
Yeah.
But in reality, while we can do some of those for like our really good partners, we need to really be focusing on transactions that are larger that will help us
Mhm.
scale and achieve those goals. Other things I think we'll be really looking to do in the future is doing pre-NTP battery storage projects. And what's cool about battery storage is we just hired a phenomenal woman who used to work for a large battery storage company on the West Coast. Um, Typically, those pieces of land are very small and they tend to be in urban areas and they tend to be extremely expensive. So, more so, I mean, equally, I would say, if not more so, these battery storage developers are really looking for a real estate solution because, a small piece of land in downtown Manhattan that's a quarter acre is going to cost quite a bit of money. And the landowner is not going to wait until notice to proceed to sell the property when you have other competing uses. So I get excited when I think about that because I think battery storage is such a critical part of where we're going as far as like, for different reasons. But yeah.
So one of the key learnings for you in that first job out of college by that mentor who recommended that you just chill out a minute was to find other hobbies. What do you nerd out about when you're not thinking about how to help solar developers?
Nico, I used to have way more hobbies. At that time, can I tell you what I did after he told me that? We hosted a refugee family from Somalia, six
Wow.
people at our house,
Yeah.
and like integrated them into the community. I mean, this is bad. This is a
Gosh.
long time ago.
Yeah.
Now, my time is really spent. I do quite a bit of travel for work, balancing that family, kids. I'm a huge outdoor person, so that's who I've always been. That's who I still
Yeah.
am. Um, Gardening and cooking, and obviously, we do a lot of travel too for fun.
You
So
do. You do.
I do,
For
yeah.
those
Oh
for
yeah,
those
I
of you
forgot.
who you've accepted into your inner circle on Instagram, we
I
know
know we
we
do.
know the
Yeah,
level of travel that the Pagliarulo clan gets into. It's
yeah,
fun though. It's fun. I get
you're
to live
fun.
vicariously through you and a few
I
of
know. Well,
few of
if you ever want
other.
recommendations, I'm here. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
okay. So I'll take you up on that because all of us
Hmm.
like to travel.
Hmm.
What is um, what's the most interesting trip that you've taken in the last 18 plus months?
I loved taking the kids to go meet their extended family in Italy, in Puglia and like the Naples region. That was the best because there was, I don't know if you saw that photo, but it was like four generations right there of of family and tons of kids. It was awesome.
If folks are so inclined, and I'm sure they will, where are you most likely to be found? Where can they catch up with you?
Where can they find me on the interwebs? Probably on LinkedIn,
Okay.
honestly.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, let's end, sadly, we have to, with a bold prediction. If we look out to 2030 and we've really unlocked the scale that we believe the clean energy sector, in particular battery
Mm.
storage and community solar, are capable of, what did we get right?
What we will need to have gotten right is incorporating battery storage to allow more renewables to come online. So predicting where we need to sort of balance out those peaks, putting the right incentives in place for battery storage. Yeah, I think that's going to be a key piece here, and there's a lot of issues right now that the industry needs to be tackling. So um, that's my. It's not very long from now. That's 7 years. We got 7 years. So
It is. I mean, I think that the real sort of cultural goal line is 2050, but I say to everyone 2030. Like if we don't turn the
yeah,
ship,
yeah.
um, there's a metaphorical iceberg waiting for us. So I appreciate your time. Laura Pagliarulo is the president at SolaREIT. Are you a co-founder? Are you considered a
I
co-founder?
am. Yeah, I'm a founder too. Yeah.
Co-founder and president at SolaREIT. I'm so grateful that we got a chance to really dig deep. I think that you added a tremendous amount of knowledge to not just the Suncast knowledge base, but to those who have downloaded it now into their craniums and are going to use it to improve their own lives.
Thanks, Nico. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. I
Yeah.
could keep talking, but appreciate it.
You know, I echo Laura's sentiment. Developing solar projects is really tough. And over the years, it has gotten easier because prices have come down. But the competition has increased, competition on every level. And developers are constantly cash constrained. Laura talked in the outset about how most developers are always seeking to build a fund for their development company, and they have this non-ITC eligible asset in real estate that they can't monetize. Thankfully, companies like SolaREIT exist through the vision of Gotham and Laura to alleviate that concern. If you're a developer that is looking for that kind of leverage, I would encourage you to reach out to Laura. And I want to say thank you for making it all the way through this episode. I learned a lot about not only how these instruments are structured, but why they're so important to help us scale the expansion of our solar and battery energy storage assets. I hope that you have takeaways that you will share with me. My LinkedIn is connected right in the description of whatever platform it is that you are watching or listening on. Hopefully, you'll take a chance to go check out our YouTube channel. We have gone all in on being video first in 2023. So you get to see the big manly beard that I'm sporting right now. I haven't shaved it since RE+. So I'm having a lot of fun, and I want to get feedback from you about how we can make this better for you. As such, we have updated, as it were, our listener survey. So today, the only ask that I have for you is go to mysuncast.com, click on the listener survey, give us your insight, input, and feedback on how we can make this show better for you. I really, really do want this to be something that serves you, your community, your colleagues and coworkers, and something that you feel is truly share worthy and comment worthy. Give us your insight so that we can make this better for you and our broader clean energy community, the solar warriors, as I call them, that are climate champions and clean energy tribe. I'm so grateful not only that you've listened this far, but that our sponsors have helped support the show so that you can do so without having to pay anything other than your time and attention, which I believe are invaluable. So once again, thank you. You can thank them by going to check out what they have to offer at mysuncast.com/sponsor. It's also how you could learn ways to partner with us to reach thousands of solar warriors and clean tech champions just like yourself each and every week, twice a week, and coming up to 3 times a week here on Suncast. Please check out Resource Labs at resourcelabs.co if you'd like to check out some of the other curated network of thought leaders that we have put together in our podcast network. For now, remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.